Stephen, thank you so much indeed for your time. It was actually 2018, wasn't it, that these exercises were agreed upon, but obviously the timing now is extremely significant.
As you say, the exercise has been on the calendar for quite some time, and I think it is coincidence that it's timed with Ukraine's counteroffensive, because ideally that counteroffensive has been events driven, and that they weren't picking a date either. But it certainly the point is to prove NATO's will and intent to defend every inch of NATO territory. So it's certainly timely.
In terms of the material that they're using for the exercises, because it's an Air Force exercise, and I'm just looking here at the comparison of the military capabilities of NATO compared to Russia. This was put together by Statista.com just a couple of months ago, and you look at the numbers of total military personnel, active soldiers, reserve forces, paramilitary units. NATO has millions and millions and millions more than the Russians. But actually, do they become secondary in terms of human personnel when compared to the air forces of the two sides, NATO versus Russia?
So the personnel are always the most important element of any military force, a ground force, an air force, or a naval force. And the thing with NATO, the US, Turkey, or other NATO allies is that we've got well-trained professionals in our armed forces. And then these exercises are just another chance to continue that training to make sure that they're the best possible people there.
The reason I ask that question is because, Stephen, people have been saying about Ukraine that however many personnel are on the ground, it's the air defense systems that Ukraine needs more than anything to be able to resist Russian attacks.
That's absolutely correct. That's one of the key points. Even with Ukraine undertaking this counteroffensive, it's important to note it still is in contested airspace. So the NATO way of war is to establish air superiority, and neither side has done that in Ukraine. So where Russia has not done well, it's because they haven't been able to establish air superiority either. But the fact that it's contested airspace makes even the ground offensive even more difficult as well. So the importance of air defense, fighter aircraft, air to ground, and even I think the exercise will have some air to sea sort of activities going on in it. It's important to realize you have to do everything all domain.
Regarding NATO's command structure, if the well, I wanted to say opportunity, but obviously opportunity is not the right word. If the unfortunate situation arose that NATO needed to deploy its air forces because Article 5 would be triggered, in other words, collective security, and a NATO member is attacked, so the others come to its assistance. How does that command structure work exactly in terms of, are all those member states taking orders from one particular commander rather than listening to their own national commanders?
They are. When you commit forces to the alliance, essentially you're falling under that joint alliance command. And NATO has standing headquarters, joint force commands in Brunsum and in Naples and in Norfolk for the Norfolk, Virginia for the transatlantic fight. And so what would happen would be it depend on exactly what we were responding to. And one of the big outcomes from last year's NATO summit was to establish regional plans. But so those joint force commanders are ready to flex to execute those regional plans should a NATO member be attacked. So if an Article 5 situation were to arise, those countries would consult. Hopefully they would come to the conclusion that an attack on one is an attack on all, and then they would start transitioning forces to those NATO commands and command and control.
Stephen Horrell, thank you so much for the analysis. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.